To the co-teaching training. This is a training for cooperating teachers. This is part of your 10 hours of training that you do to be a cooperating teacher here at Point Loma Nazarene University. So you've completed the 8 hours of training, or you will complete the 8 hours of training that you do about how to be a coach, the coaching skills. You are absolutely welcome to prove that on that site that you've had previous training. This 2 hours, and it's actually not going to be a full 2 hours. We're counting the time that it takes for you to review the forms and such. But these next few minutes will be to equip you to be a specifically equipped cooperating teacher here at Point Loma Nazarene. So this is specific to our university and to the needs that you'll have, that the students will have here in our program. So if you haven't already, there is a PowerPoint that goes along with this video. It should be located right below the link to this video. If you haven't already, if you can download that so that you can watch this and follow along in the PowerPoint, or you can just have them side by side on your screen, whatever is easiest for you. So once you have that done, we'll go ahead and jump right in to talk a little bit about your role as a co-teacher here at Point Loma Nazarene University. So on the first couple of slides, we talk about our mission and our vision for the university, and we'd like you to be familiar with who we are. We are a Nazarene University, a Christian university, located in San Diego on Point Loma. In the Point Loma neighborhood. We have 2 graduate ed campuses, one in Mission Valley, about 8 miles inland from our main campus, and then also a grad ed campus in Bakersfield. So if you're a cooperating teacher for Point Loma Nazarene, you're either in Kern County or San Diego County, and we'd like to welcome you as a member of our team. Our mission and vision are stated there. You will see very strongly in those first 2 slides how seriously we take the idea of service, and that we want our students to be working with K-12 students to make positive changes in society and in the lives of their students. So we're very excited that you've welcomed them into your classroom as a cooperating teacher. BLNU candidates have completed several milestones prior to entering your classroom. So on slide 4, we talk about what they have completed as part of that preparation. The first thing they've completed is all their coursework. So our program is designed that they are not taking any courses during clinical practice. They do have a seminar that they attend throughout the time that they're with you. But it is not a class, so we make sure that all their coursework is completed so that they can focus specifically on working with you in your classroom. Because they have all their coursework completed, they are able to be at the school when you're at the school. So if you come early in the morning and stay a little late, the expectation is that they'll be there with you. They've observed for 80 or more hours in classrooms for math, the English language, so language acquisition. They've also observed special education, and then they've observed literacy and reading. They've passed the CSET, they've passed the CBEST, and they have a certificate of clearance through the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. So they've been cleared to be in a classroom with children. They also have purchased an insurance plan for $1 million personal liability, very similar to what teachers have through the teachers union if they're a member. So we're going to jump into the co-teaching basics. I'm now on slide 5, which is called co-teaching basics, and we're going to talk a little bit about what co-teaching is. I want to give some brief definitions of who is who in the classroom. You, as the what we would have called the master teacher in the past, are called a cooperating teacher, and you may have heard that language before during induction. So a cooperating teacher is the leader in the classroom. You are the teacher of record, and the cooperating teacher is leading the student through the aspects of teaching that are required in order for them to get that hands-on rich experience that they get during clinical practice. Clinical practice, again, is what we now call student teaching. Your candidate should be in your classroom for 8 weeks, full day. And that's also outlined in the forms training in the clinical practice handbook if you haven't watched that video yet. The student teacher, what we would have called them in the past, we now call the teacher candidate. So we refer, and I'll refer to this throughout this training and in the previous training, we refer to our teacher candidates as candidates, and our K-12 students we refer to as students, so that there isn't confusion. So the cooperating teacher is what we used to call the master teacher. The teacher candidate is the student teacher, and then the students in the classroom we call students. So as I use those terms throughout this training, that will help you be familiar. I want to talk briefly about the new teacher performance assessments. This system has been in California for quite a while, but there has been a change in the system. So in the past, we've had 4 TPAs, and now the TPAs, the teacher performance assessments, are in 2 cycles, cycle 1 and cycle 2. And cycle 1 and cycle 2 have replaced the previous 4 teacher performance assessments. The teacher performance assessments are the pedagogical assessments for teacher candidates. So they ensure that candidates have a good capacity for teaching, that they have the pedagogical skills. Cycle 1 and cycle 2, it will depend on which phase of student teaching, a phase of clinical practice your teacher candidate is in. If they are in clinical practice 1, so it's their first 8 weeks in a classroom, then they will be in cycle 1. If they've had a previous cooperating teacher and they're in phase 2 of clinical practice, then they will have cycle 2. So the good news is those match. So phase 1 is cycle 1, phase 2 is cycle 2. Both cycle 1 and cycle 2 require videotaping in the classroom. So we ask that you aid your teacher candidate in recording the lessons that are required for cycle 1 and cycle 2. The candidates have a very strong feel for what is required in cycle 1 and cycle 2, so they will be approaching you as they need to do that videotaping, and we ask that you just help them in being able to provide the videotape that's required. That videotape is then submitted through the Pearson website, and then the candidates annotate on that video to show different aspects of their teaching. So we're on slide 5, co-teaching basics. One of the most important things that's changed in clinical practice when we move to clinical practice from a student teaching model is that the teacher candidate is an apprentice rather than a student. So what that means is this is another professional in your room there to co-teach with you rather than someone who you're simply teaching. So it should be an additive process. I always think of the television show Grey's Anatomy, where they're in their residencies and they're learning to become doctors. When a teacher candidate is in your classroom, they are equipped with everything that they need except for the more rich hands-on experience. So our hope is that they will be a co-teacher with you, and that they will be working alongside you rather than them teaching and you observing all the time, or you teaching and them observing all the time. There is a timeline in the clinical practice handbook, and you'll see that in the forms training, that tells you how to gauge when it's appropriate for the candidate to take over more responsibilities. There's also a supplemental video about co-teaching that talks about that timeline in a little further detail. So if you'd like more information about that, there is a supplemental video on this same training website. So let's talk about what co-teaching is. It's you working together with your teacher candidate, and your teacher candidate working with your students. And I'm on slide 6, and I'd like to just highlight that last point there. Both teachers are actively involved and engaged in all aspects of instruction. So what we really want to make sure of is that if you're at your duty, they're at your duty, that they're really doing the same things that you would do or that you are doing. So it mimics the instruction that they'll be providing in their classroom. So this really is, we consider this to be the most important part of their teacher preparation, because this is where they really understand how teaching gets done. I always think of this as the actual driving rather than the behind the wheel. On slide 7, we talk about the basic purpose is to provide a situation where the teacher candidate is truly getting the real experience of teaching. So that's our hope. A couple of co-teaching basics. I'm on slide 8. The slide is called Co-Teaching Basics. It's the first slide titled that way. Both are part of the preparation. So if you have lesson plans that you've already prepared that you're using, again, as we do as seasoned teachers, you would include your teacher candidate in reviewing those plans before teaching. So they would be part of the life of your classroom from planning all the way through instruction. And then we also want to make sure that they are involved from moment one. In the past, we've had them kind of observe for quite a while before being part of the classroom. We want them to be part of the classroom right away. In their previous experiences in the program, they've done some observation and then some working with kids. So they should be ready day 1 or 2 to jump right in and help you as you are able to include them in that process. And slide 2 on co-teaching basics, we talk about that beginning on the very first day. And also that you're modeling and coaching them. You're making visible the processes that you're doing as a cooperating teacher. And I just want to make this note again on that second co-teaching basics slide. One of the things that I found helpful as a cooperating teacher was sometimes I would just literally talk right over the heads of the kids, physically talk over the heads of the kids and make eye contact with my teacher candidate and just say something like, let's talk about what just happened, later on. And we would debrief a little bit about choices that I made or different choices that she or he had made. And I just found that to be a really rich experience. I didn't know if that would be distracting to the students in the room, but it actually ended up being very natural just to have a quick conversation about, let's talk about that transition later on. So we encourage you to do that with your teacher candidate. And you're probably hearing sirens in the background, so this is a real life, it's just like teaching. Real life things happen. We're on the slide that is entitled Key Elements. So if you're not there, if you can just turn to that slide. And these are just the key elements of co-teaching, what's critical in co-teaching so that it works well. The first is that you're obviously completing this co-teaching training, that you've reviewed the forms training. So the forms training is the clinical practice handbook. That lets you know all the forms the teacher candidate is using. It lets you be comfortable with the codes of clinical practice, what the boundaries are. There's a page in that handbook that talks about your role, your teacher candidate's role. So please complete that particular training prior to the first day with your instruction with your teacher candidate. Then this is the co-teaching training, obviously. And then there's the pairs training, and I love the pairs training. It's maybe my favorite part of being a cooperating teacher. And what the pairs training does is it helps you to know who your teacher candidate is. You're talking about personality and preferences. I'm a very linear thinker. I am very organized. I like things in a very particular way. And I had a teacher candidate who was very artistic and bright and visionary and big ideas. And I was very anxious about that and being a linear person. And what I learned from doing a version of the pairs training was who he was, and that really helped me to help him with some organizational skills that are absolutely required in a classroom. And it also broadened my toolbox, put more tools in my toolbox, and broadened my thinking to be a little more creative and to give my kids other ways of expressing themselves in their assignments. So we really do hope that that Paris training introduces you to your teacher candidate, and we also hope that this experience is professional development for you as a cooperating teacher. I found that that was very true for me as a cooperating teacher. Collaborative partnerships are what we have with your school district and your school, where we are collaborating to have a candidate in the classroom. What we want to be is something positive for your school. We want to be something positive for your classroom, that having 2 adults in the room is something better than having only one, because we have another set of hands for the work. We want to develop a common language, so we're going to talk about some terms. We've done that already, but we're going to talk about some terms for co-teaching that will give you a common language for how to take turns, if you will, as you're teaching. We also want to talk about some clearly defined expectations, who's going to take which role in each scenario for co-teaching, and then we also want to encourage you. There is a sheet for co-teaching and co-planning in the handbook, and we want to encourage you to designate time to work through that process so that you have experienced all the aspects of co-teaching by the time your teacher candidate has completed his time with you. The benefits are vast, but I just would point you to the co-teaching benefits slide. I think the most important for the teacher candidate is that the students see that the teacher candidate as a real teacher. Many years ago, as a beginning teacher candidate, I was 19, so I was a very young teacher candidate. I was getting my credential as an undergrad. My high school English placement, my very first observation, I was literally a year older than the students, and my master teacher, at the time it was called master teacher, said, "This is Miss Hamilton, and she is our guest teacher." And something about that esteem of guest instead of student teacher, she's observing, made a difference with the kids, and they were very respectful from day one and just saw me as a guest in the room, and then as a participant. So that's really the important part of co-teaching, is that from day one they're a teacher rather than just an observer or someone who's just learning by watching. There's an equal partnership, we share resources, and then we have mutual support for learning with the students, with us as professionals. The benefit to you as a cooperating teacher is the ability to do more successfully. So you've got that teacher candidate in your room, and you are able to do more than you could do by yourself. So running a small group, we're going to talk about some parallel teaching. I'm going to share with you my favorite strategy of the list. We can be more productive. It's easier to model and participate when you're both sharing equal roles. And the candidate becomes competent more quickly to be an active partner in your classroom with the co-teaching model. So with that, I will ask you to turn to the slide that's called Co-Teaching Strategies, and let's jump into the strategies. So the first strategy is usually what we use at the beginning of our time with our teacher candidates, and that's called One Teach, One Observe. So this really does mimic the previous iterations of clinical practice student teaching, where one person is teaching and one person is observing. So that can be the teacher candidate teaching and the cooperating teacher observing, or it can be the cooperating teacher teaching and the candidate observing. So it goes back and forth. The key there is that there is specific observational information you're acquiring. So for example, I may be looking at how engaged students are while my teacher candidate is teaching a math lesson. I may have my teacher candidate observe me as the cooperating teacher, and I want him to observe my transitions and how on task the students are during transitions. So it's not simply observation, it's one teach, one observe for specific information. So you set that teaching point before you observe. Then there's one teach, one assist. This is kind of mimics an instructional aid capacity where one is teaching. That can be the cooperating teacher teaching and the teacher candidate assisting, or vice versa. And again, these are in order of development. So one teach, one observe is the easiest, and then it becomes more complex. So one teach, one assist is pretty self-explanatory. Station teaching, this is very similar to what we do in primary classrooms, where the kids rotate through the station of the cooperating teacher and the teacher candidate. And then we have parallel teaching. And parallel teaching is actually my favorite because essentially we're dividing the class in half and teaching the same thing at the same time. Here's why I like that. It takes a class of 30 and makes it a class of 15. And as you're parallel teaching, your teacher candidate is still hearing what you're doing as a cooperating teacher. It is really helpful for teacher candidates with pacing because they can hear how long it should be taking because they're teaching the same lesson at the same time. I also love parallel teaching because it really does help planning to be very thorough, because you have to plan together because you're both going to teach the same lesson at the same time to different sets of kids. So parallel teaching, I found, is the one that I use the most as a cooperating teacher, and the one that I found was the most beneficial for my my teacher candidate. Supplemental teaching is where kids need something more, and obviously one of the adults in the room is supplementing the teaching with further information. This very much mimics a push-in model that we use for students with special needs. And then alternative or differentiated teaching is just looking at two different approaches to the same information. This is for those kids who didn't get it in a first pass, and it's often in a small group. It's giving them another option in a different way to get that information. So it's just what it sounds like. It's differentiated alternative instruction. And then just an idea to think about when we think about team teaching is that students see an invisible flow between one teacher and the other. So between the teacher candidate and the cooperating teacher, from their perspective, it is truly a team. And my first grade class was team taught. It was a 1-2 combo, and I was never really sure who my teacher was, because that was true of as a 6-year-old, I just knew I had two of them, and sometimes I had one and sometimes I had the other. And that is what I picture when I think about this idea of all these strategies lead themselves to team teaching. So it's two adults, one set of kids, and you're sharing that responsibility as a team equally. So our last slide is what does co-teaching actually look like? The first is that from the very beginning of this experience, you're encouraging your teacher candidate to participate, that they have valid ideas, that you're asking them to be part of planning and instruction. From the very start, your teacher candidate is engaging with the students. There's not a waiting period where they're waiting to see. I always wanted to make sure with my teacher candidates that the students didn't see them as kind of a TA or a tutor from the high school coming to the junior high. I taught junior high. I wanted them to see that this was really a teacher, and so I really esteemed that teacher role quite a bit. That eventually the candidate is taking on full responsibility for the classroom, and they're leading, if you will, and the role is shifting to their leadership in the classroom. You are still in the classroom as the cooperating teacher, but we're shifting from the onus of responsibility being on the teacher, on the cooperating teacher, to the teacher candidate. And again, that timeline is outlined in the PLNU Clinical Practice Handbook and also in that supplemental video. And then the last two, I think, are the most important, that they demonstrate competencies as a teacher. You're going to be measuring your candidate formally 3 times. You're going to be filling out a weekly progress report each week on Friday. And what we're really asking is, are these candidates ready to be teachers without another adult in the room? So this is a certification process, and it's an evaluation process. It's also a support process, but at the end of the experience, we should be able to certify with the university supervisor that this candidate is competent and has exhibited all of the strategies that they will lead as a teacher in their own classroom. And then the last one is that the teacher candidate should have some opportunities to teach alone. And you can use your judgment for that, whether that's going to be one teach, one observe, or whether you truly want to give them some opportunities in the classroom without your presence. So that is the co-teaching training. We are always available on either the Mission Valley campus or here on the Bakersfield campus. We would love to help you if you have any questions or concerns. One of the most important things that I always say at the end of the co-teaching training is that if there's ever a concern, we want to know about that just as soon as possible. You will have a university supervisor who's visiting your candidate quite a bit throughout the experience, and they'll be checking in with you, and they are our emissary from the university. So please work closely with them as well. Again, we're glad to have you on the Point Loma team, and we look forward to having this experience with you.